Il Vangelo la consola?
Mi consola?
Non
Ah,
so.
lei dice il
Sì,
Vangelo di
sì,
Cristo?
sì.
No, la
Non mi
consola,
pare...
no, allora in questo caso proprio escludo totalmente la parola consolazione.
Che cos'è per lei, un
No, per me il
testo?
Vangelo è una grandissima opera intellettuale, una grandissima opera di pensiero che non consola, che riempie, che integra, che rigenera, non so come dire, che mette in moto i propri pensieri, ma la consolazione, proprio che farsene della consolazione?
Hey everybody, welcome to Pillbox Movies. I'm Hank, and today we're going to be watching the 1964 biblical drama The Gospel According to St. Matthew. This film is directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. Pasolini is kind of a famous cause célèbre in Italian filmmaking. He's probably most well known for Salo, or 120 Days of Solemn. Salo is easily known as one of the most controversial films of all time, probably for good reason. I haven't seen it, but we may do it at a future date in this collection. But The Gospel According to St. Matthew is kind of a different beast altogether. It was definitely a surprise subject for Pasolini, who was a known atheist, a known Marxist, and so his approach to Story of Christ was met with some earlier resistance, but as time passed, this has grown to be accepted as one of the great film adaptations of the Story of Christ. I forgot what collection it is, but it's like there's some like, you know, Catholic Church newsletter or release that included the Gospel according to St. Matthew among one of the great depictions of Christianity or Catholicism in film history. Another one being The Mission, which is a good movie. But anyways, we're going to check out The Gospel According to St. Matthew and see what thoughts come out of us. Pasolini was also a known philosopher, poet, and I think I said Marxist before, but he was actually murdered under very suspicious circumstances. Pasolini was murdered in 1975, and it's kind of unresolved as to whether or not it was a hate crime because of his homosexuality, or because of his Marxist thinkings, or even as a means of coercion and intimidation by the Cosa Nostra. I've tried to watch this movie like 3 times over before, just never caught the right circumstances, so this is going to be the millionth time I've seen this opening with Joseph and Mary. There she is, there's Mary, there he is, Joey C, Joey Chestnut, Joey Cristo. I have to say, I understand the sincerity and the seriousness of this opening scene. This is one of the most comic reveals in film history. Without even saying a word, she has cucked you out for God. You know what? We gotta relate to Mary's plight too. I think we focus too much on Joseph's anguish in this situation. Mary's going through it too. She ain't never copulated with anybody. And all of a sudden, her belly is full after 8 months. I'd take a walk in that scenario, just to clear my head. So I'm not really sure as much about, like, the film history or the kind of context of the making of this film. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. But apparently, Pasolini had the intention of filming this in kind of neo-Italian realist style, which kind of means stripping it as much as possible of artifice and kind of filming it like a documentary almost. Oh, I love that removal of the diegetic sound. That's always a good moment.
Giuseppe, figlio di David, prendi pure con te senza esitazione Maria tua sposa, perché quello che è generato in lei è opera dello Spirito Santo, il tuo popolo dai suoi peccati.
And also in that kind of neo-realist tradition, using non-actors as your performers. I love the inclusion of this piece in this movie. I think you can kind of tell which filmmakers like really love music and which, can do without it, but even going as far back as like 1965, you can kind of tell Pier Paolo Pasolini has an ear for what pieces will kind of express the internal engine or the intent his films are trying to summon, the feeling. And this is just such a great pull on his part. Honestly, what other like biblical or gospel kind of movie are you gonna expect to hear Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child? Just great musical selection. Italian neorealism is one of the great traditions at capturing human faces. This like kind of like particular obsession with the countryside, with the destitute in post-war Italy. It kind of conjures up a kind of empathy or specificity that, you know, evokes for me like, oh, what's her name? Like Diane Arbus. That mule is iconic. I kind of like the subtlety of these scenes. I mean, maybe it's just like giving enough space for you to kind of put in your own sentiments or feelings as much as possible, but like I really felt like that moment kind of conjured up the crisis or the tension of Mary feeling like she's leaving behind these people to their own deaths, but needing to prioritize the safety and welfare of her own child. Yeah. This is bad. I don't think anything good is going to come out of this. Full ass Game of Thrones Season 2 opener. This is not good. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Oh, what's the matter, buddy? You not feeling well? Somehow your body's not doing well after ordering the murder of a bunch of children? Committing an actual act of genocide? That sucks for you. I hate that for you. Yo, Archangel Gabriel, you gotta stop sneaking into these people's DMs. Anyways, the one in The Last Temptation of Christ, that John the Baptist, that was played by Andre Gregory of My Dinner with Andre. But you can kind of see how Martin Scorsese, I don't know if he's like saw or loved the Gospel according to Saint Matthew, but in terms of filmic techniques, he definitely adopted the same approach of cutting out diegetic sounds in moments of intensity or spiritual rapture. And we got our unibrow Jesus. Iconic. We love that for him. I haven't seen a lot of Pasolini's other films, but he definitely has an eye for faces, I gotta say. That's a big-headed Christ. Ooh, this is really nice. I wish this film had been preserved a little bit better, because this is some real fine imagery right here. That's really beautiful. Who dat? Okay, Satan. It is interesting. I was kind of thinking about because obviously in modern times there's always going to be a question of kind of the literalization of the miracles or wonders or acts of God in the Bible, like kind of in modern readings, like if we're kind of to interpret the omniscience and the omnipotence of God, we kind of grapple with, you know, if he could do everything and knows everything, why doesn't he save these particular people? Why doesn't he ever act out of his own power as opposed to his own weakness? And to a certain degree, it's a legitimate question, but it perhaps misses the subtext of the religious teachings. And I feel like it's addressed in scenes like this, where Christ says that to a certain degree, these teachings are not about power. They're not about witnessing miracles. Christianity is positioning itself as a religion that kind of that accepts weakness and accepts strife and toil, and says to its followers, like, you're not following this religion in order to seek out powerful men. You're seeking, this religion serves you as like balm or a salve for you in your moments of great weakness. Yeah. I think it's a good design decision, but it is making me wonder, kind of dramaturgically, why the character of Jesus Christ is the only one who wears like a shawl as a male character in this. I think it's a really good design decision, and it kind of like frames him as being different from everybody else, but I'm wondering what the kind of like in-story, in-universe justification for it is, because as far as I've seen, only women are wearing headdresses all the time. And I guess the Jewish priests. That's a cool way to approach this kind of scene. I like that. Christ just like walking by, dropping DMs on folks, as opposed to proselytizing on a hill. He's just walking up to people and being like, yo, the word of God is here. Peter's like, I don't need fishes anymore. I feel like that's kind of gay. I don't know. I really like this though. This is kind of really pretty. This kind of exclamatory point of Christianity, or taking on these new teachings as being an exaltation or an ecstasy. Other James 2. In like a good and bad way, you can kind of tell how Pasolini is kind of using visual shorthands in telling his story, like casting the person with the most brutal features as Judas Iscariot. Non crediate che io sia venuto a portare pace sulla terra. Io non sono venuto a portare la pace, ma la spada e la figliola dalla madre sua e la nuora dalla suocera sua. He's a rebel. I amici dell'uomo saranno i suoi familiari. Chi ama il padre e la madre più di me e chi ama il figliolo e la figliola più di me non è degno di me. I don't know. I really feel like there's kind of this focus on the fascination of Christ. I mean, I gotta say, like, truly, Pasolini has like a fascination with faces that you can drink off of the screen. And he points his cameras towards like odd or kind of outlier faces, but they are very prominent. Okay, that's a little unfair. Non accumulate tesori su questa terra, dove tignola e ruggine corrodono, e dove ladri sfondano e rubano. Accumulate invece per voi tesori in cielo, il quale fa sorgere il suo sole sopra i cattivi e sopra i buoni, e manda la sua... Like, am I wrong? This is a film that seems to be very fixated on the personality or the appeal of Christ. I don't know. This is a really kind of like hard thing to parse out, because every media is kind of like about the fascination or the cult of personality of Christ. But to a certain degree, I think in the kind of like the framing of this, it's kind of presenting Christ as a vanity. Like, by stripping away all of the pomp of the Gospels, of trying to make this as small a story as possible, and like strip away kind of like preaching on a hill and like the thousands of extras and stuff and the wide landscapes or whatever, and putting this is just framing it as Christ as a head in a frame. It really, really, really focuses down as like Christ is like a figurehead, or it's kind of presented in this kind of repetitive, kind of concussive way where it's like inducing you into a trance. He just keeps talking and talking like a dude on a first date, and you're just like, yeah, I believe you. Dude, this is still going. Will Christ ever be written as like an interesting film character? So this is definitely framing Christ as kind of anti-establishment, which for a Marxist I would say is a very kind of appealing reading. I love that passive voice. That's very politician language. We have to figure out a way for him to die. We love that for him. That bread does look good, though. Don't know what to say about those mackerel. And again, kind of like recontextualizing this as like a feast for like children and like the old and kind of incapable, as opposed to this being like a big raucous wedding. Very, very Marxist of you. That's cool. How'd they make that shot? Yeah, I'd freak out too if I just saw Jesus like walking on water. I'd be like, that's a big flex. Don't know why you're doing that to me. I think they're just superimposing a figure onto the water. I don't know. Jesus just be flexing all the time in this movie.
La madre tua e I fratelli tuoi sono là fuori, chiedono di parlarti.
Chi è la mia madre e chi sono I miei fratelli?
I genuinely don't know what Pasolini is trying to express in his characterization of Christ in this. I'm sure this is all from the source text, but what he chooses to frame, I don't know. It's an easy equivocation. Anybody who does what I tell them to will be my brethren. I don't know. I feel like this is presenting a pretty cultish approach to Jesus Christ. At the same time, I also think this is a very kind of Marxist and anti-establishment Christ. So maybe I'm kind of like projecting the perceived values of Pasolini onto this too much. I'm undoubtedly doing that.
Maestro, che devo fare di buono per ottenere la vita eterna?
Perché mi interroghi su ciò che è buono e ama il prossimo come te stesso?
Tutte queste cose le ho osservate, che mi manca ancora?
Di quello che hai e donalo ai poveri e avrai un tesoro nel cielo.
I kind of feel like Christ is a shit poster in this.
In verità vi dico che un ricco difficilmente entrerà nel regno dei cieli. Sì, in verità. È più facile a un
Anti-prosperity gospel. I really do. I mean, like, this, just in terms of my kind of modern attention span, this movie stretches my limits a bit, but I love the amount of storytelling that's expressed non-verbally in this film. I think that is like a really key and distinguishing element of this film. I mean, she's young, but I think you're hitting a little bit above your weight class, man. You should probably say yes.
Per questa tua danza, chiedimi quello che vuoi.
Dammi qui in un bacile la testa di Giovanni.
I understand. That's Salome? Oh, God. So it is the same as Herod. Anytime it cuts away from Christ, it's like, here's a bastard. I was not expecting that at all. Oh, man. That scene was a bit of a welcome reprieve for me personally from these Christ shots, because Pasolini chooses to frame Christ and his disciples in such extreme close-ups, and it can get a little bit disorienting for a viewer. For me personally, I kind of feel like extreme close-ups are so intimate and so visually challenging. You're forced to observe such minute human minutia and like micro expressions that it can be a lot to process as a passive film viewer. Well, debatable. Church is in a weird state.
saprà farsi piccolo come un bambino è il più grande nel regno dei cieli. E chi riceve un bambino come questo...
Sounds like how you operate a cult, but whatever.
Ed essi lo condanneranno a morte. E lo daranno in balia dei pagani per essere scherzato. Al terzo giorno risorgerà.
Judas is like, what? Love that. This is the kind of exultory scene you expect out of your Christ parables. It's not a really parable, your Christ stories.
Let me fucking put a hand on me, I'ma fucking rip your face off, bitch. What did he do to him? Cause he fucking pushed me next time.
Can I get a waffle? Can I please
Again,
get a waffle?
Anti-authoritarian Jesus is king.
La mia casa sarà casa di orazione, ma voi ne fate una spelonca di ladri.
Hard to argue with that. Wow, Jesus finally cracks a smile.
E non avete voi letto quel passo? Dalla bocca dei bambini e dei lattanti ti sei procurata una lode.
Yo, they are going to F him up for this. There's nothing people hate more than kids in a church.
Anch'io vi farò una sola domanda. Il battesimo di Giovanni, donde veniva? Dal cielo o dagli uomini?
E se diciamo dagli uomini, c'è da temere la folla. Perché tutti
So religion's basically rhetorical arguments posed at each other.
non lo sappiamo.
E neppure io vi dirò con quale autorità faccio queste cose. Che ve ne fa? Un uomo aveva...
Mosè ha detto, se uno muore senza avere figlioli, il suo fratello ne sposi la vedova.
Why did Moses say that? Religious texts are obsessed with use cases. Christ makes a questionable tactical swerve by making all of these hot takes on the Pharisees and the scribes, and then instead of raising up a revolution, sacrificing his body for the salvation of mankind.
È giunta l'ora che dobbiamo prendere Gesù. Ma con l'inganno.
Why'd they wait so long?
Per farlo morire.
This is why you generally don't trust people with big hats.
Succo della vite, fino al giorno in cui lo berrò nuovo con voi, nel regno del Padre mio.
That's good. Jesus decided to give up drinking. I'm all for that.
Prima che il gallo canti, 3 volte mi rinnegherai.
Anche se dovessi morire con te, non ti rinnegherò.
Okay, Peter, whatever. We'll see. Like, it's a different context, obviously, the biblical context, but weird energy for modern times if you were to ask your friends to, you know, come witness you as you pray. I feel like that'd be a weird request. You know, they did just, like, have a big meal with you and, like, drink a bunch of wine, so, like, I'd give them a pass.
Così non siete stati capaci di vegliare con me nemmeno un'ora.
Okay, an hour.
E pregate per non
I don't know. An hour is one of those, like, up in the air kind of things. I feel like an hour isn't a long time to wait, but an hour is also a long time to make somebody watch you pray. It's a toss-up.
Oh, amico, a questo sei venuto.
Il Vangelo secondo Matteo. I guess I've never really understood, like, textually, how the crowds managed to turn against Christ so rapidly. They seemed all about him during Lent. I do like kind of like this roaming camera work, like POV, witness in the crowd. I mean, it's POV Judas, but, you know. God, I wish that were me. Ah, Peter, you tried so hard and got so far. But in the end, I do kind of like this take, though. I mean, this biblical take, this portrayal of the disciples as being weaker than they are strong. I think it would be kind of counterintuitive to the principles of Christianity to have very kind of strong, brutish, and warlike disciples. So it's good that Peter betrayed Christ 3 times, and that James laid down the sword. Because I guess the principal tenet of Christianity, in an anthropological sense, is tenacity, its ability to sprout up like weed in those who are less empowered, those who are disenfranchised. And so, as a religion, its characteristics need to be in that of weakness and sublimation, and submission. Which, oddly enough, makes it a religion that powerful people can use to control the masses very easily. Who would have thought? Pilate's like, this is dirty business. I'm gonna wash my hands of this. Who's the music supervisor to this movie? He's got a good ear. I have to say that as spare as this film is, and as kind of resistant it is to portraying emotions in any kind of overwrought way, the story of Judas is rendered pretty sensitively, and it's really well done. I can't really explain it, but in the very sparse terms of this film, you really do get a sense of Judas's anguish, and I think it's partially because you just spend so much time with him. You like see the process of him watching Jesus be tried, and you see his attempt at renouncing his accusations. The movie is specifically, I don't know if it's very sympathetic to Judas's plight and his trials, but it is fixated on it. Fixated on this sense of regret. Again, I like these crowd shots. It's very on the ground, as opposed to the way that most kind of biblical films would shoot this kind of scene. It's like a welcome reprieve, but also I'm like, I like the decision to take the camera distance very far away from Christ in these scenes. They're like all about like witnessing him, and we don't get much into the kind of inner thought process or emotional context of Christ. I'm sure they're gonna flip back onto him once he actually takes the cross, but this is kind of like a good, like editorially speaking, this is a good time within the text to kind of cut away from Christ and see like the reactions of the other characters. Christ as a film character is kind of difficult to relate to, I guess, or identify with, and so it can be really hard to kind of put your lot in the entire time with this character that is so kind of supernatural and superhuman. It's kind of a difficult emotional leap for an audience to make, so by displacing this section onto his disciples, onto his mother, seeing their reactions, you kind of give a good human emotional fulcrum point on which to understand this story. It's also an interesting tension. I mean, this is something that was discussed specifically with the Passion of the Christ and that episode of South Park, whether kind of the representation of these biblical texts and the depiction of Christ in general, if the story is one of scripture, of teaching, of lessons, or of suffering, and what kind of religious message are you sending in primatizing one or the other. I think as a religion, like, Christianity wants to have its cake and eat it too, and showing, like, you know, the teachings are important, but also the suffering is important. The suffering is like a monumental way to kind of gain access to the emotional sympathies of your congregants, of your believers. But ostensibly, we're meant to understand the teachings of Christ, which in some ways are very sophisticated and kind of difficult for a layman to understand. Difficult ideas of mercy, of subjugation, of submission, not subjugation, of submission, of love, of worship. But whether or not you like understand the things you believe, it's definitely this moment of suffering that kind of crystallizes the belief itself, if not the understanding of your own belief. I like that handheld moment. This is really beautiful. Like I said, to a certain degree, we're taken out of the point of view of Christ at this point. This is like, this is not being depicted as an internal struggle for him anymore, which is something that a lot of, like, biblical adaptations would take. They would take the approach that we need to be inside his head and we need to understand the suffering from his point of view. But this is actually kind of really, in a way, humanist approach, and seeing suffering as a social event, not something that affects one individual, but in fact, it affects an entire group. It kind of like spreads like ripples in the water. I can't really verbalize what I'm thinking very specifically right now, but just the idea that this is moved from the story of Christ as like a story of intimacy, of seeing the interior of his mind, into, I don't know, I don't want to call it generic, but more of an approach of seeing how, I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to say is Pasolini is more fixated on like the reactions of a crowd now than he is on the individual thoughts or feelings of an individual, which is, I'd say, like representative of most biblical adaptations, but I don't think I'm like kind of like maybe superimposing more Marxist meaning onto it than it necessarily has. But that's just my feeling, that this is kind of like more of a representation of the suffering and the suffering of the masses, and trying to understand like kind of like social plight. Because, like, I mean, these are more modern adaptations, but if you like look at like the Passion of the Christ or or Last Temptation, they are supremely fixated on the individual experience of Christ, the man, and kind of depicting that tension between his humanity and his godliness. And this is like not at all interested in those aspects. This is particularly fixated on how Christ affected the people around him. Get out of here, Gabriel. Jesus. I don't know if it's like this in the Bible, but I do like how this kind of story kind of began with Mary and ends with Mary. And again, the sense of exaltation of faith at the end. For a very static film, I do like that it's kind of like opening up at the end and like showing people running and leaping in great ecstasy in their faith. Difficult film to watch, just in terms of my like modern temperament and attention span, but I do think there are aspects of it that are really beautiful. definitely. Yeah. I have questions. There are certain things that I wish I could like understand or qualify a bit better. I think there's definitely like a very clear Marxist reading in this movie that you can kind of like fasten onto the idea of Jesus as a philosophical figure and a Marxist figure wanting to like relinquish wrest control from those in power and deliver it onto the masses. And again, I don't want to go too far with this, but I kind of feel like there is a reading of this, especially in the middle segment, that deals in like the fascination and the beauty of Christ, like specifically the physical beauty and allure of Christ, and the gaze onto onto Christ as like a fascinating or attractive figure, which is like it's kind of like inherent in all media related to Christianity. There's a desire and a need to portray Christ as beautiful, and it's a weird kind of gray area where the desire to portray Christ as a beautiful person, it's a mixture of like faith and vanity, and it's kind of hard to tell where the one begins and the other, where one ends and the other begins. And I don't know, as like kind of like remote as I felt like the first half of this was, the story's got a good ending, I gotta say. Whoever wrote the story of Jesus Christ really knew how to make a glorious and mysterious ending to it. So yeah, this was the Gospel according to St. Matthew. I think I appreciated it more than I loved it, but it's good to get a sense of Pasolini as a filmmaker, aside from just like, oh, he did Salo, he's a shit poster and stuff like that. I don't know if this was like entirely a work of adulation and reverence, but it is an interesting kind of observation on the filmmaker's techniques and his kind of the moral bent of his filmmaking. It's interesting to me that the church kind of like readily accepts this as one of the great depictions of Christianity. I feel like it skirts the line sometimes, and maybe it does so subtly enough to get away with it, but I don't know. I feel like if I were a bishop or a pope and watch this movie, I'd be like, oh. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments down below if you've seen this or any of Pasolini's other works, Salo obviously being a big one. I might try watching Salo later on as just a point of comparison, and I definitely want to watch his like adaptive work, I guess I'd call it. Like I really want to see Oedipus Rex and maybe his version of the Canterbury Tales. Did he do Canterbury Tales? Yeah, I hope you check out the Gospel according to St. Matthew. If you're of the religious persuasion, I hope it's a good opportunity for reflection and meditation. And if not, those things too, but not about Jesus. And until then, keep watching good movies.